Okay, let's kick off today's deep dive. We're jumping into, well, quite a specific and frankly very contested set of material. We're looking at the claims and counter-arguments in the book, The War of the Six Lies in Hebrew. That's Boy Fidue. Our goal here, just to be clear up front, is to really dissect the structure of the argument, how the author builds his case. We're looking at the mechanics, not taking sides on the politics.
Yeah, that's a crucial distinction. We're analyzing how the author, Amiur, constructs this defense. And Amiur, he's not new to this kind of analysis. His earlier book, The Workshop for Consciousness Engineer, went deep into how he believes the Israeli media, what he calls tishkaret, the sort of leftist or establishment press, how he thinks they shaped public thinking, the narrative inside Israel, for decades.
So his starting point is basically that the information war was already kind of being lost, even domestically, and this new book is pushing back against that, what really drove him to write it.
It seems to stem from a real deep frustration. He talks about this massive gap between what he calls our justice, the fundamental rightness, Zionist cause, and then our defeat in the battle for public opinion.
Okay.
And he doesn't think that defeat comes from having weak arguments. He thinks it's because the counter-arguments against what he calls transparent and weak lies, well, they just haven't been made effective. So the book is his attempt to build like an ideological toolkit, both shield and weapon.
And the structure itself is quite clever, isn't it? Boiling down all the complex global criticism into just 6 core points.
Exactly. It's a taxonomy of sorts. He built the whole book around tackling these 6 claims head on, one by one. He sees them as the absolute foundation of all the opposition. His stated aim, to make the counter-arguments really easy and fluid, something anyone could grasp and use, backed up with examples, history, leaving, as he puts it, no stone.
Okay, before we get into the weeds on a couple of them, let's just list those 6 lies that structure the book. What are they?
Right. So the 6 core claims Amiur focuses on refuting are: 1, that Israel just doesn't have a right to the land historically, legally, whatever.
A foundation.
Yeah. 2, that Israel caused the Nakba, the Palestinian catastrophe, in 1948, specifically through expulsion. 3, that the presence in the West Bank, Judea, and Samaria, as he terms it, is an illegal occupation under international.
A huge point of contention, obviously.
4, the claim that Israel is an apartheid state. 5, that Israel is the one refusing peace, always turning down deals, the peace refusenik. And finally, 6, that Israelis, particularly the IDF, act as war criminals.
Wow. Okay, that really covers the spectrum, doesn't it? History, law, ethics, military conduct. It's comprehensive. All right, let's dive deeper now into the 2 areas our source material really detailed: the legal status of the territories and that 1948 Nakba narrative. These feel like the biggest battlegrounds globally.
Absolutely. These are where Amiur invests a lot of energy building, legally and historically.
Let's start with the legal status. Line number 3, the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria. He says calling the occupation illegal is simply a lie. How does he build that counter-argument? What's the foundation?
Well, he builds it on 2 main pillars, legally speaking. First, he asserts this idea of a continuous judicial connection to the land. This is key because it suggests Jewish rights didn't just spring into existence in 1967. He traces it back much further.
Back to the Mandate period, post-World War I.
Exactly. He points to foundational international things like the San Remo Resolution in 1920, the League of Nations mandate for Palestine.
Okay. And the argument there, if I'm following, is that those documents already recognized a historical connection and set the stage for a Jewish national home in that territory, giving a sort of pre-existing legal claim.
Precisely. That's the core legal theory. So when the territories were captured in 1967, they weren't, in this view, taken from a recognized sovereign power. Jordan's annexation, remember, was barely recognized internationally.
Only by the UK and Pakistan, right?
Correct. So the argument goes, these were territories with a pre-existing, legally recognized Jewish claim, not sovereign Jordan, and that distinction for Amiur means the standard definition of occupation sovereign territory doesn't quite...
Okay, that's the first pillar, the pre-existing right. What's the second?
The second focuses squarely on the 1967 war itself. Amiur insists it was fundamentally a defensive, and that legal classification matters. Capturing territory in a war you didn't start. A war of self-defense, especially land used to attack, and without a clear sovereign, well, it grants the defender certain rights under international law.
Rights to hold the territory, at least until there's a peace.
That's the argument. It provides legitimacy for administering the territory pending a final negotiated settlement that determines.
Now, this is where he brings in contemporary policy, specifically U.S. policy.
Yeah.
How does that connect?
Ah, yes. This is a really interesting rhetorical strategy. He spends quite a bit of time looking at U.S. statements, administration after Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Obama, Trump, Biden.
All of them.
Yeah. And he points out what he sees as a consistent pattern. Democrats, Republicans, they all refuse to explicitly label the Israeli presence in the territories as illegal under international law.
They criticize it, sure.
Yeah.
But not using that specific legal word.
Exactly. They'll call it unhelpful to peace, or an obstacle, a barrier, maybe illegitimate in a political sense, but they stop short of illegal.
That's the key word they avoid.
That's the key word. And Amiur argues, look, if it were clearly illegal, wouldn't at least one administration under pressure have said? He claims this careful, decades-long avoidance by the U.S. with all its legal expertise basically proves his point. It shows, in his view, that the legal foundation, based on those historical links and the defensive war, can't just be dismissed out of hand.
Okay, let me just push back slightly here, keeping our neutral stance. Couldn't the counter-argument be that the U.S. avoidance of illegal is just, political pragmatism? They don't want to completely alienate a major ally, so they use softer language. Even if their lawyers might privately agree it's problematic, it's diplomacy, not necessarily a legal verdict.
Oh, absolutely. That's the counter perspective, and Amiur anticipates it. But he turns it around. He says, okay, if it were truly unambiguously illegal according to international law, wouldn't the sheer weight of global opinion and political pressure eventually force an administration, especially democratic ones maybe? The fact that no administration has crossed that line, he argues, suggests the legal case against illegality is stronger than opponents admit. He essentially uses the diplomatic ambiguity as evidence for his legal interpretation.
Interesting. So he flips the script. The lack of a clear condemnation becomes a kind of tacit acknowledgement of the legal complexity or even the validity of Israel's position. Okay, that's lie #3. Let's pivot sharp to lie #2. Deconstructing the 1948 Nakba. This is obviously incredibly sensitive, deeply rooted in historical memory and trauma.
It really is. It's foundational to the Palestinian narrative of the conflict. Amiur is directly confronting the claim that the Nakba, the catastrophe for the Arabs, was caused by deliberate Israeli actual massacre.
And what's his core counter? How does he propose to flip that narrative?
His argument is blunt, almost provocative. He acknowledges a catastrophe happened, but then he says they caused it themselves. The book argues Israel didn't want the Arab population to leave. In fact, he claims Jewish leaders actively tried to stop them from fleeing.
He claims they tried to prevent it, with specific examples.
Yes, he offers anecdotes. He mentions key figures like David Ben-Gurion, even before he was prime minister, and local leaders, people like Yosef Weitz or Abba Hushi in Haifa. Hushi, for instance, is quoted as directly pleading with Arab residents in Haifa, "Please don't run away, we won't hurt you." Amiur presents these efforts as genuine, showing the initial Zionist leadership perhaps hoped for coexistence, or at least didn't plan for a massacre. He even suggests this effort came from a realization, maybe after the fact, of the injustice unfolding, trying to mitigate it.
Okay, so if the Jewish leadership wasn't pushing them out, according to Amiur, who was responsible for the flight, where does he place the blame?
He points the finger squarely at the Arab leadership of the time, particularly Haj Amin al-Husseini, the Grand Mufti. The argument is that the Mufti played a critical role in encouraging or even forcing the Arab population to leave their homes.
Oh, but what was the message?
The book claims the Mufti sold them a specific story. He allegedly told residents, "Leave now, it's only temporary, the Arab armies are coming, we'll win quick." And the promise wasn't just about returning home. It was apparently, you'll come back victorious in a few weeks, you'll slaughter the Jews, and you'll take their homes and property too.
Wow. So the idea was leaving wasn't defeat, it was a strategic retreat before a promised imminent victory and reward.
Exactly. That's the narrative Amiur puts forward. It reframes the motivation for leaving less about pure terror of Jewish force, more about heeding their own leadership's call based on a false promise of swift victory.
But what about specific incidents where Israeli forces were directly involved in displacement? The cases always cited are Lod and Rommel. How does the book handle those?
Yeah, he has to address Lod and Rommel. He doesn't ignore it. He reframes it. He argues the main expulsion happened after those towns had initially surrendered. Then he claimed there was an attack on the Israeli forces by Arab fighters who hadn't surrendered or who broke the terms. And crucially, this is happening in the context of the wider war. This is after March 1948. The invasion by 5 Arab armies is imminent or underway. So the Israeli action to clear those towns, to stabilize their lines and protect their rear flank near the main road.
He frames it as a military necessity, a tactical decision in the heat of battle, driven by a perceived threat.
Precisely. Less a pre-planned ethnic cleansing policy, more a harsh wartime decision made under duress because the surrender failed or was violated, posing a direct military threat. It shifts the focus from intent to immediate context.
Okay. Now, you mentioned Amiur uses what he calls receipts, evidence from Arab sources themselves. Tell us about the use of contemporary Arab press. Why is that so central?
This is probably one of the most powerful parts of his rhetoric. He digs up articles and statements from Arab newspapers and figures from right after the 1940 war, before the unified Nakba narrative really solidified into its current form. And according to Amiur's research, these sources tell a very different. They show Arabs at the time blaming themselves, blaming internal factors for the defeat and the displacement, not primarily blame.
Really? Who specifically did they blame, according to these sources?
Well, multiple targets. They reportedly blamed the Mufti, Haj Amin al-Husseini, for his reckless promises and disastrous leadership that encouraged the flight. They apparently blamed the refugees themselves, sometimes harshly calling them the runners for abandoning the fight. And significantly, they blamed the neighboring Arab state for, issuing travel documents that made leaving easy, but then failing to deliver militarily and not properly supporting the flight.
So a lot of internal finger-pointing immediately after.
Yes. And then there's the economic angle. This one's particularly potent.
What's that?
Amiur cites Arab press reports from the time that apparently included admissions, even confessions from Arabs saying they had willingly sold large amounts of land to the Jews over the years. The phrase he quotes is that they admitted they were dazzled by Zionist gold.
Wow. That directly counters the narrative of pure displacement and land theft. It introduces voluntary sale and economic motives.
Exact. He uses it to argue two things. One, that much land acquisition was legitimate purchase, reinforcing his right to the land argument. Lie, hashtag. And two, it complicates the victim narrative of 48 by suggesting economic factors and choices were also alongside the fear and the Mufti's influence.
Okay, that's a very detailed look at his approach to the 1948 narrative.
Yeah.
So we've covered the legal status of the territories in the Nakba. Let's broaden out now and touch on the other four lies Amiur attacks, starting with the very first fundamental right to the land itself. Lie, hashtag 1.
Right. Lie, hashtag 1. The claim Israel has no right to be there. This is the bedrock. Amiur counters this by linking the historical right directly to the political and diplomatic rights that follow.
How does he make that connection stick, especially in an international context?
He hammers home the idea that this historical right wasn't just a sentiment. It was formally recognized at key moments by, quote, all the nations of the world. He's pointing back again to things like San Remo, the League of Nations mandate foundational acts of international law in the post-World War I era. His argument is that initial global recognition of the Jewish connection and right to a national home provides a legal basis that later political can't just erase.
And didn't you mention he uses religious text too?
Yeah.
In perhaps an unexpected way?
Yes, this is quite striking. Obviously, he references the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible. But to counter religious claims from the other side, he actually cites the Quran. He points to specific verses which, he argues, state that the land of Israel belongs to the children of Israel. It's a bold move trying to use the opponent's own holy book to neutralize their religious claim to exclusivity over the land.
That's definitely a form of rhetorical jujitsu. Okay, let's jump to lie, hashtag 4, the apartheid state accusation. This is a really powerful charge in today's discourse.
Yeah.
How does Amiur approach dismantling that one?
Well, he has to contrast the reality inside Israel proper with the definition of apartheid, which is fundamentally about systemic, state-sanctioned racial segregation and discrimination, denying basic rights based on race. So the book would highlight facts like Israeli Arabs are full citizens. They vote. They serve in the Knesset, Israel's parliament. They're judges, diplomats, doctors.
So the focus is on legal equality and political participation within Israel's recognized border.
Exactly, showing that all citizens, regardless of ethnicity or religion, live under the same laws, have the same political rights, even if they strongly disagree with government policy. That reality, he argues, is the polar opposite of the institutionalized racial hierarchy that defines apartheid. He'd likely argue the complex situation in the West Bank relates to security, unresolved political status, and residency, not a system of racial segregation inherent self.
Got it. Then there's lie, hashtag 5, Israel as the peace refusenik. How does he counter the idea that Israel is the one blocking peace?
Here, he flips the narrative again. He has to shift the label of refusenik onto the Palestinian and wider Arab leadership. He does this by recounting the history of peace negotiations. He details major peace offers made by Israel over the years, Camp David in 2000 with Barak and Arafat, Olmert's offer later, the parameters discussed around Annapolis.
And the argument is that these offers were comprehensive, involved significant Israeli concessions, but were rejected.
That's the core of it. He frames these rejections not as haggling over details, but as stemming from a fundamental refusal by the other side to accept the very legitimacy of a Jewish state, no matter the border. So he argues, if the other side's ultimate goal isn't a two-state solution but the elimination of Israel, then they are the real refuseniks because they refuse to accept the existence of the negotiating partner.
Okay, and finally, lie, #6, the war criminals chart, often directed at the IDF. How is that addressed?
This comes down to justifying military conduct within the framework of international law and the laws of armed conflict. Amiur's approach would likely emphasize the IDF's operational codes, things like rules of engagement that mandate trying to minimize civilian harm, the principle of distinction, proportionality. But critically, he'd also argue that the groups fighting Israel systematically embed themselves within civilian population, using homes, schools, hospitals, mosques as bases for attack, as weapons storage sites, command centers.
Deliberately blurring the lines between combatants and civilians.
Precisely. So the counter-argument becomes, when the IDF responds to attacks launched, the resulting tragedy, while off are legally and morally the responsibility of those who fight from behind shield, it distinguishes unavoidable, tragic collateral damage in a complex urban battle from deliberate, systematic targeting of civilians would be war crime. His goal is to give readers the context to make that.
Right. So across all 6 lies, Amiur is systematically providing counter-arguments, historical context, legal interpretation. What did he personally take away from this massive effort of compiling?
His big takeaway apparently was that the power really lies in the information itself. He came to believe even more strongly that the Zionist case is inherently valid, and the key is just getting the facts clearly and effectively. He sees the book as arming people, specifically what he calls the broad Zionist consent, with the knowledge they need to, in his words, crush every argument. It's about ideological self-defense and offense.
And part of that defense is tackling damaging narratives coming from within Israel, right? He addresses some pretty harsh internal criticism. There was that example involving someone from B'Tselem.
Yes, this was a stark example he used. An individual identified as OG from B'Tselem drew an analogy, comparing Israelis living normal lives today, while, in OG's view, others are being annihilated, to ordinary Germans during the Holocaust, living normally while Jews were murdered in the camps.
That's an incredibly potent and inflammatory comparison given the historical context. How did Amiur respond to that?
His reaction was swift and absolute. He called it a mixture of nonsense and lies. Basically beyond offensive, he saw it as intellectually bankrupt and dangerous. His point is that this kind of extreme self-criticism, drawing Holocaust parallels, isn't just wrong, it's destructive because it adopts the enemy's framing wholesale. It eats away at the internal moral confidence needed to face external attacks. For Amiur, you have to shut down that kind of internal narrative alignment with the opposition.
It's about maintaining that ideological baseline, ensuring the home front is solid before you can effectively fight the information war globally.
Exactly.
And speaking of global, that brings us to the dissemination plans for the book. This isn't just for Israeli readers.
Not at all. He was emphatic about that. The fight is global. So the book is already being translated into English. It's apparently in production now. The goal is to get these arguments into the hands of supporters and advocates in the English-speaking world.
But the ambition goes much, much further than English, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. The really audacious goal is Arabic. Translation into Arabic. The target audience. Hundreds of millions of Arabic readers across the world.
That's huge. But how do you even get a book like this, with its controversial arguments about Arab leadership and history, into those hands? There must be significant risk.
There are. And the proposed method of distribution highlights that. He spoke about needing to deliver the book potentially in a sealed envelope directly to people.
A sealed envelope? Why? For security.
Presumably, yeah. It implies that simply possessing or being seen reading this book could be dangerous for someone in certain parts. The content challenging foundational narratives about the Nakba, criticizing historical leaders, citing the Quran for Jewish rights, it's inherently subversive to established viewpoint. The sealed envelope isn't just logistics, it's a commentary on the information environment itself. Accessing this alternative perspective might require discretion, even secret.
So, connecting this back to the bigger battle for global opinion, it's not just about having the better argument, is it? It's about whether people can even access the argument safely.
That seems to be the underlying challenge. Amiur clearly believes in the power of the facts he presents. He seems confident that if an Arabic reader could just see the evidence he's compiled, maybe the old newspaper clippings blaming the Mufti, for example, it could genuinely change minds, break through the propaganda.
So, for you listening, what does this deep dive give you? Well, you've now got a pretty detailed map of how one major counter-propaganda effort, Amiur's book, structures its response to what defines as the 6 key anti-Zionist claims.
You've heard the specific arguments he deploys, the legal case built on defensive war and that U.S. policy nuance, the historical case leaning heavily on those contemporary Arab press accounts about 1948, the way he tackles the apartheid and war crimes charges by focusing on legal equality and the complexities of asymmetric warfare.
We've seen the goal is really to equip people for this information battle. But that final piece, the ambition to translate into Arabic and the need for that sealed envelope, it really underscores the scale of the challenge.
It really does. It brings us right back to that core tension. Is knowledge truly power if it can't be freely accessed? So here's the final thought to leave you with. Is this ambitious project, especially the Arabic translation needing secret delivery, the ultimate test? If it works, does it prove knowledge can overcome propaganda even in hostile environments? Or Does the very need for that sealed envelope tell us something else? Does it confirm that the forces suppressing alternative narratives, the fear and control, are still so strong that the battle for perception is far from won, maybe even unwinnable through information alone?
A challenging question indeed. Knowledge might be the weapon, but getting it past the enemy lines seems to be the real war.